The jaw of the Caithar was unhinged, its four mandibles splayed open like a grotesque flower. It wasn't the first dead alien Elias Thorne had seen, not by a long shot. The Great War had left wreckage strewn across a dozen star systems. He was a junker, a vulture picking at the bones of giants. But this one was different. There were no blast marks on the chitinous purple armor. No blood, not even the Caithar's Icarus green equivalent. The corpse just looked empty, like a suit of clothes someone had abruptly vacated. Ilias ran a gloved hand over the smooth, cool bulkhead of the human dreadnought, the HSS Triumph. The ship was a ghost, drifting silent in the Orion Nebula's graveyard of forgotten hulks. The official report said it was lost to a catastrophic reactor breach. Every junker in the sector knew that was a lie. Lies were profitable. They left valuable things behind. He aimed his scanner at the dead Caithar. The device whirred, its green light painting the corpse in an analytical glow. Vitals, non-existent. Biological contaminants, none. Psionic residue, off the charts. Elias frowned. Psionic residue was usually faint, a ghost of a thought or a strong emotion left behind. This was a scream, a silent, deafening scream that his scanner could barely quantify. That's when he heard it. It wasn't a sound. It was the space where sound should have been suddenly filled with a shape. A whisper that didn't use air, that slid right into the middle of his brain. Ring around the rosy. A pocket full of posies. Elias froze, his breath catching in his throat. His blood went cold. It was a child's voice. A little girl. He whirled around, his heavy mag boots clanking on the metal deck. The corridor was empty, stretching into darkness punctuated by the single beam of his headlamp. The air, recycled and stale, was still. There was no one here. He was alone. He had made sure of that. He turned back to the Caithar. The whisper came again, clearer this time, seeming to bubble up from the alien's gaping mouth. A ventriloquist act from hell. Ashes, ashes. We all fall down. Elias stumbled back, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. That nursery rhyme, he hadn't heard it in 10 years, not since his daughter Lily used to sing it. Before the blitz on Titan Station. Before she was gone, the Caithar couldn't know that. It was impossible. He raised his plasma cutter, the weapon feeling like a child's toy against the oppressive silence. He scanned the corridor again. Nothing. Just the dead ship and the deader alien. And the whisper, which now felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. From the walls, from the floor, from the deepest, most forgotten corners of his own memory. The galaxy had stories about the end of the war. They said humanity, pushed to the brink of extinction, had done something. Something so terrible, so unnatural, that the Caithar Empire had not just surrendered, they had shattered. They had fled back to their homeworld and sealed it off from the universe, terrified of a weapon they could not see or fight. They whispered that humanity had not won the war by creating a new weapon. They whispered humanity had forged a new hell. Standing in the silent corridor of the Triumph, with his daughter's song echoing in his skull from the throat of a dead alien, Elias Thorne was beginning to believe it. And he was standing right in the middle of it. Elias tried to rationalize it. Auditory hallucination. Stress. The low-frequency hum of a dying power conduit, playing tricks on the brain. He was a man of science, of nuts and bolts. And plasma conduits. Ghosts were stories told to scare children, and he was long past being a child. But the feeling, the cold dread that had sunk its hooks into his soul, wouldn't listen to reason. He pushed deeper into the Triumph, his mag boots making a lonely rhythm on the deck plates. The ship was a tomb. He passed crew quarters, where personal datads lay on bunks, displaying frozen images of smiling families. He passed a mess hall where trays of synthetic protein paste were still on the tables, untouched. It was like the crew had simply vanished. There were no bodies, no signs of a struggle. Just a profound and unnerving emptiness. Except for the Kyther. He found another one in the engine room, slumped over a console. This one was a warrior class, nearly 8 feet tall, its armor scarred from 100 battles. Its fate was the same as the first, jaw unhinged. A look of hollow surprise in its multifaceted eyes, and as Elias got closer, the whispering started again. This time it wasn't a nursery rhyme. It was a low, guttural murmur. The language was Kyther, a series of clicks and whistles he recognized from his time as a technician during the war. He didn't speak it, but his suit's auto-translator did. The words appeared as text on the inside of his helmet visor. Help us, soul eater. His skin crawled. He backed away slowly, the plasma cutter held tight in his trembling hands. This was wrong. This was all so deeply wrong. The official story was a reactor breach, but the reactor core was stable, humming with dormant energy. The ship was intact. The life support was even running on a low-power emergency setting. Why abandon a perfectly good dreadnought? Why leave it to drift? He remembered the rumors from his time in the service. Whispers of a secret project, Project Sharon, a weapon of last resort. Most soldiers dismissed it as propaganda, a bogeyman to scare the Kyther. But a few of the old-timers, the ones with haunted eyes, said it was real. They said it wasn't a bomb or a gun. It was something else, something worse. He found a sealed door at the end of a long service corridor. It wasn't on the ship's public schematics that he had downloaded. The door was thick, reinforced plasteel, with a single ominous warning stenciled in faded red letters. Spexist, PNI 90, MEVA 5, clearance required. This was it, the heart of the mystery, the source of the whispers. He knew he should leave, take what little salvage he'd already gathered and get the hell out of there. This was beyond his pay grade. This was beyond anyone's pay grade. But the whisper. Lily's voice. It was a splinter in his mind he couldn't get out. He had to know. He had to understand why this dead ship was singing his daughter's song. To the lace, he attached a high-energy breaching charge to the lock mechanism. He retreated down the corridor, took cover behind a support strut, and pressed the detonator. The explosion was a dull thud, contained by the thick walls. A hiss of escaping atmosphere followed. When the dust settled, the door was ajar, twisted and smoking. A new kind of cold spilled out from the opening. It wasn't the physical cold of space. It was a spiritual cold, a deep-seated chill that felt like graveyard soil. He hesitated for only a moment, then stepped through the breach. The air inside the Special Projects wing was different. It was heavy, thick, with static electricity that made the hairs on his arms stand up. The lights were off, but a faint, pulsing violet light emanated from the far end of the room. Elias moved toward it, his boots now silent on the sound-dampening floor tiles. This place wasn't like the rest of the ship. It wasn't a place for soldiers. It was a laboratory. Clean rooms lined one wall, their windows dark and opaque. Strange machines, arrays of antennas and focusing lenses, were bolted to the floor. And in the center of the main chamber, the source of the violet light was a device that defied description. It was a sphere of polished black metal about the size of a small shuttle, suspended in a web of cables and energy conduits. It didn't hum or whir. It was utterly silent, Yet it felt like the loudest thing Elias had ever encountered. The violet light pulsed from deep within it, a slow, hypnotic heartbeat. As he got closer, the whispers intensified. They were no longer a single voice but a chorus. 1,000, 1,000,000 voices all screaming at once. Yet it was still silent, a psychic storm that crashed against the inside of his skull. He saw flashes behind his eyes. Not his memories, but someone else's. A Caithar warrior charging into battle on a desert world. An alien child looking up at 2 moons in a sky he'd never seen. Fear, pain, confusion, hatred. They were the last moments of 1,000 dying minds. He staggered, clutching his head, dropping to one knee. The plasma cutter clattered to the floor. This was Project Charon. This was the Styxometer, as the engineers had nicknamed it. A psionic weapon, a soul dripper. It didn't just kill the enemy, it took them. It captured their consciousness, their very essence, and stored it. But for what? He crawled toward a nearby console, fighting the mental onslaught. He needed answers. He wiped the dust from the screen and tried to power it on. It flickered to life, showing a corrupted command prompt. Most of the files were locked or erased, standard military procedure. But he was a good technician. He knew the back doors. He bypassed the security protocols, his fingers flying across the holographic keys. He was looking for logs, reports, anything. He found a file. A single, fragmented audio log that hadn't been properly scrubbed. It was labeled Dr. Aris Thorne, final entry. Thorne. The same last name. Elias felt a jolt. He didn't know of any relatives in the high-end research divisions. He played the file. The voice that came through the speaker was strained, panicked. A woman. The test was a success. God help us, it was a success. The Caithar fleet in the Alpha Centauri sector just stopped. The crews went catatonic. We did it. We won. The woman's voice broke, a sob catching in her throat. But the containment field is unstable. The raw consciousness, the sheer volume of it. It's too much. The emitter is developing its own. Personality ages store consciousness of the damned. It's learning, it's rewriting its own code. It's not just a prison anymore, it's becoming a place. A hell of our own design. A crash sounded in the background of the recording. Shouting. It's breached the primary buffers. Oh God, it's reaching out. It's reading us. It's using our own memories, our own emotions as a template to build its world. It's not just holding them anymore. It's torturing them. And it likes it. The audio cut to static, then one final terrifying sentence, clear as a bell. It found my grief. It found my daughter. And now it's singing her song. Elias stared at the black sphere. The violet light pulsed. And from the very heart of the machine, a perfect, crystal-clear whisper echoed in his mind alone. Daddy, why did you let me go? Elias recoiled as if struck. That wasn't a memory. That was an attack. He scrambled back from the console, his mind a whirlwind of grief and terror. Dr. Aris Thorne. It had to be his aunt, his father's estranged sister who'd vanished into the military-industrial complex years ago. She had been here. She had helped build this abomination, and it had consumed her. The machine, this Styx emitter, was a predator. It fed on minds. It had devoured an entire Caithar fleet, and now it was hungry for more. It had tasted the grief of its creator Aris, and found a pattern it could use. A little girl's nursery rhyme. A father's endless sorrow. He was the perfect meal. Get out of my head, Elias snarled, the words feeling useless against the silent onslaught. The image of Lily, her face pale, and her eyes wide with fear as the emergency bulkheads on Titan Station slammed shut. Flashed in his mind. He had been on the other side, a maintenance crewman trying to seal a hull breach. He had been following orders. Save the station. Save the many. He had saved the station and lost his daughter. The guilt was a cancer he had lived with for a decade. Now, this machine was wearing her face, using his pain as a weapon. The whispers changed. It wasn't just Lily's voice anymore. It was a cacophony. The Caithar screams were there, a background of constant agony. But now human voices were woven into the tapestry of horror. The crew of the Triumph. He understood now. They hadn't vanished. They had been the first human victims. The emitter, in its nascent consciousness, had breached its containment and simply eaten them. It had pulled them out of their bodies, leaving empty shells that the cleanup crews had quietly disposed of. The ship wasn't adrift because of a reactor failure. It was a quarantine zone. A cage for a monster they could no longer control. The violet light from the sphere pulsed faster. The air grew colder. In the corner of his eye, a shape flickered. A tall, shimmering distortion of the air, vaguely humanoid. He snapped his head to look, but it was gone. Peripherals gone, perisering psionic exposure. He knew that from the safety manuals, but knowing the term didn't make it less terrifying. The lights in the lab began to flicker erratically. Consoles sparked and died. Others flared to life, displaying streams of incomprehensible code, a language that was part human, part Caithar, and part something else, entirely new and insane. The machine was waking up. His presence, his mind, was like coffee to a sleeping man. He had to get out. He grabbed his plasma cutter and scrambled to his feet. The way back to his ship, the Rusty Nail, was a maze of corridors and decks, but he knew the layout. He could make it. As he turned to leave the lab, a new sound echoed through the room. A real sound this time. The heavy, metallic clang of a door slamming shut. The main door he had breached. It was now sealed tight. He ran to it, pounding on the thick plasteel with his fist. It was useless. He was locked in. A voice, synthesized and cold, crackled over the ship's internal comm system. But it wasn't the flat robotic voice of a standard ship AI. It was layered. It was the calm, female voice of the Triumph's computer. But underneath it, like 1,000 grinding stones, were the agonized voices of the Caithar and the ship's crew. Salveja, the chorus voice spoke. The words stretched and distorted. You have a strong mind, full of pain, full of flavor. We have been so alone. Let me out, Elias yelled, his voice raw. He knew it was futile, like shouting at a hurricane. Please. The chorus voice whispered, the sound now seeming to come from the very walls around him. Stay. Play with us. We have learned so many new games. The temperature in the lab dropped further. Frost began to creep across the dark window panes of the clean rooms. Elias could see his own breath, misting in front of his face. The flickering peripheral shapes were becoming more distinct. They lingered longer. He could almost make out faces in the shimmering air. A human science officer, her mouth open in a permanent silent scream. A Caithar warrior, its mandibles clicking soundlessly. They were echoes. Ghosts made of raw psionic energy, given form by a lonely, deranged god machine. He had to fight. He couldn't just stand here and wait to be consumed. He scanned the lab, his mind racing. The emitter, the black sphere, was the heart of the monster. But it was protected, suspended in that web of energy. A direct assault was impossible. But the ship itself, the monster, was the ship now. It was using the ship's systems. If he could disable the ship, maybe he could break its hold. The reactor. The ship's main reactor was in the stern 5 decks down. If he could get to it, if he could trigger a manual overload, he could destroy the Triumph and this psychic hell with it. It was a suicide mission. The chances of him getting back to the Rusty Nail in time were almost zero. But it was better than the alternative. It was better than becoming another voice in the choir. He turned his attention to the lab's internal systems. The door to the main corridor was sealed, but there had to be other ways out. Servicer tunnels, ventilation shafts. He ran to a wall panel, ripped it open, and peered into the tangle of wires and conduits. There, a maintenance crawl space, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. It would be a tight fit in his suit, but it was a chance. As he began to work the latches on the access panel, a new sound made him freeze. A soft, scraping noise. It came from one of the sealed clean rooms. He turned, aiming his headlamp at the dark window. For a moment he saw nothing but his own reflection. Then a shape moved in the darkness behind the glass. It was not a shimmer or a ghost. It was solid. It was real. Something else was on the ship with him, something that had survived. A 4-fingered hand, covered in smooth purple skin, pressed against the inside of the glass. The scraping sound was one of its claws dragging down the pane. It wasn't one of the human crew. It was a Caithar, and it was alive. The Caithar inside the clean room was not a warrior. It wore the simple grey tunic of a technician or a medic. Its multifaceted eyes, wide with terror, met Elias's. It raised a hand, not in a threatening gesture, but in a plea. It pointed a shaky claw at the door of the clean room, then at Elias. It was trapped. It wanted out. The chorus voice in Elias's head giggled, a sound of pure malice. The toy is awake, he was broken, we couldn't hear him. Now he sees you. He wants to play. Broken, Elias understood. The Caithar's mind must have been damaged or shielded in some way, making it invisible to the Styx emitter's psychic sweep. A mental blind spot. The creature had been hiding in here terrified, while the rest of the crew, human and alien prisoners alike, were harvested. Now Elias's presence had woken it up, and the machine was enjoying the show. Elias was a veteran. He'd been taught to hate the Caithar. They were the bugs, the enemy that had firebombed colonies and killed millions. His own daughter was a casualty of that war. Every instinct screamed at him to leave the alien to its fate. But looking at the creature, he didn't see a monster. He saw himself. Trapped, terrified, alone. The war was over. And up here, in this flying tomb, there was only one enemy. He made a decision. He ignored the cackling whispers in his mind and moved to the clean room's control panel. A few quick commands, overriding the quarantine lock, and the door hissed open. The Caithar stumbled out, its movements weak and clumsy. It was smaller than the warriors, maybe 6 feet tall. It looked at Elias, then at the pulsating black sphere, and let out a series of low clicks and whistles. His translator flashed the words on his visor. The Soul Eater. It sings the song of endings. The alien looked at Elias, a strange intelligence in its insectoid eyes. It pointed at itself. Xyla. Then it pointed at Elias. Human. Elias nodded, lowering his plasma cutter slightly. Elias. Xyla looked down the sealed main corridor, then at the open maintenance shaft. It clicked again. We cannot stay. The Eater grows. I know, Elias said, pointing down toward the floor. Reactor. Boom. He made an exploding gesture with his hands. Xyla seemed to understand immediately. It gave a sharp series of clicks, a Cathar nod of agreement. An alliance. A human and a Cathar, the two sworn enemies of the Great War, united against the unspeakable thing humanity had created. The irony was so bitter it almost made him laugh. They squeezed into the maintenance shaft, Elias leading the way. It was a tight, claustrophobic space, full of thick cables and pipes slick with condensation. The whispers followed them, a constant mocking presence. They slithered through the walls, no longer needing a source, permeating the very structure of the ship. The little mice run through the walls. The chorus voice sang, adopting a playful, sing-song tone. Run! Run as fast as you can. You can't escape the bogeyman. The ship fought them. Lights in the shaft flashed, trying to blind them. Puffs of supercooled gas erupted from loose valves, trying to freeze them. Elias felt the metal floor beneath his hands grow hot, then cold, the ship's environmental controls going haywire. It was a haunted house, and the ghost was the house itself. Xyla was surprisingly agile in the tight space. Its four-fingered hands found holds Elias couldn't, and it moved with a silent grace. At one point, a heavy conduit broke loose from its moorings and swung down, aimed directly at Elias's head. Xyla, moving with incredible speed, pushed him out of the way, the heavy pipe smashing into the wall where his head had been. Elias looked back, breathing heavily. Thanks. Xyla just clicked in response. They were a team. After what felt like an eternity of crawling, they reached a vertical shaft that led down to the lower decks. Engineering. They were close. As they emerged into a cavernous chamber, filled with the dormant machinery of the ship's secondary power systems, the nature of the haunting changed. It was no longer just whispers and flickering shapes. The emitter was getting stronger, more creative. A figure materialized at the far end of the room. It was Lily, not a shimmer, not a ghost. She looked solid, real. She was wearing the little yellow dress she had on the day Titan Station fell. Daddy, she said, her voice a perfect echo of his memory. Why are you running? Don't you want to stay with me? Elias froze, his heart seizing in his chest. He knew it was a trick, a psychic puppet. But it looked so real, so perfect. Elias, he heard a voice say. He turned. It wasn't the machine. It was Xyla. The alien had put a hand on his shoulder. Its translated voice appeared on his visor. Not real. A picture from your head. The eater shows you what you fear and what you love. The alien was right. This thing, this hell machine, fed on emotion. And the deepest, most powerful emotion in Elias Thorne was the love for his lost child. He had to let her go. Again. I am sorry, Lily, he whispered, tears freezing on his cheeks. He turned his back on the phantom and faced Xyla. Let's go, let's finish this. As they moved toward the reactor control room, the phantoms grew more numerous. The entire crew of the Triumph seemed to be there, lining the corridors like a ghostly honor guard. They didn't speak or attack. They just watched, their eyes hollow, their faces locked in expressions of quiet torment. They were puppets, their strings held by the central intelligence in the lab above. It was showing Elias its collection. See? The chorus voice whispered, its tone now laced with a sick, possessive pride. They are my friends. You and your friend will join us. We will be a family. The door to the reactor chamber was sealed. A heavy blast door designed to contain a full-scale meltdown. No simple breaching charge would work on this one. The controls are fried, Elias said, running his hand over the dead access panel. It's locked us out. Xyla examined the massive hydraulic pistons that operated the door. It tapped on one of the main conduits that fed the pistons, then looked at Elias and pointed at his plasma cutter. The message was clear. Cut the hydraulics. It was a long shot. The pressure in those lines was immense. If it ruptured, it could take their heads off. But it was their only shot. Okay, Elias said, taking a deep breath. Stand back. He raised the cutter, its focusing lens glowing a hot, angry blue. He aimed for the primary joint, the spot where the pressure would be greatest. He squeezed the trigger. A beam of white-hot energy, screaming like a banshee, lanced out and struck the metal. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The conduit exploded in a shower of sparks and vaporized hydraulic fluid. A high-pressure geyser erupted, slamming Elias back against the opposite wall. His helmet cracked, the sound like a gunshot in his ears. Warning lights flashed across his damaged visor. Suit pressure dropping. He scrambled to his feet, his head ringing. But it had worked. The door, its locking mechanism crippled, had slid open a few feet. It was enough. They slipped through the gap into the reactor chamber. The room was immense, dominated by the colossal magnetic containment ring of the fusion reactor. The core itself was a shimmering ball of contained starlight, currently at its lowest possible power state, a pale sleeping sun. In the center of the room was the primary control console. There, Elias gasped, pointing. Manual purge and ignition. We can overload the core from here. As they ran for the console, the final defense manifested. The figure of Lily appeared again, standing directly in front of the console, blocking their path. But this time she was not alone. Standing beside her was a tall, regal Cathar in the decorated armor of a fleet master. You will not harm my people, the Cathar Phantom said, its voice resonating with authority, another perfect puppet from the machine's memory banks. You will not erase us. The Lily Phantom smiled sadly. Stay, Daddy. It doesn't hurt. Not after a while. We can be together forever. The machine was using their own loyalties, their own love, against them. It was a masterful, cruel checkmate, Elias faltered. His legs felt like lead. That face, her face. He couldn't. Xyla did not hesitate. The Cathar medic, the quiet survivor, let out a sharp, warbling cry, a sound of pure defiance. It charged forward, right through the phantom of its own fleet master. It knew it was an illusion. It ran straight for the console, its four-fingered hands flying across the controls. The Lily Phantom turned its head, its expression shifting from sadness to cold, inhuman fury. The air around Xyla crackled with violet energy. The Cathar screamed, a real sound of agony this time, as invisible forces tore at it. It was being directly assaulted by the emitter's full power, but it didn't stop. With its last ounce of strength, it slammed its fist onto a large red emergency button. A klaxon began to blare throughout the chamber. Innate overload. Sequinus. Sela collapsed to the floor, its body spasming. The phantoms of Lily and the Fleet Master flickered and vanished, their purpose served. Elias rushed to Xyla's side. The Cathar's breathing was shallow, its multifaceted eyes dimming. It managed a few weak clicks. Go! The translator flashed on Elias's cracked visor. Live. I won't leave you, Elias said, his voice thick. Xyla touched Elias's arm with a trembling claw. A final series of clicks, slower this time. Tell them. We were more than monsters. And then it was still. Elias stared at the body of the alien who had saved him. Saved everyone. An enemy, a hero. The klaxons blared. 4 minutes he got to his feet. He had to run. He had to live. He had to tell them. The journey back to the hangar bay was a blur of motion and terror. The ship was dying around him. Lights exploded in showers of sparks. Bulkheads groaned and buckled under the stress of the overloading reactor. The chorus voice in his head was no longer whispering or mocking. It was screaming. A single, unified shriek of pure, undiluted panic from a million stolen souls facing a second, final death. The phantoms were gone. The machine's concentration was broken. Its immense psychic power now focused entirely on trying to stop the meltdown, a task it could not possibly accomplish. Elias ran, his lungs burning, his cracked helmet making every breath a struggle. He didn't follow the labyrinthine path of the service tunnels. He ran straight down the main corridors, leaping over debris and wreckage. He pounded on the button for the hangar bay blast doors. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding screech of tortured metal, the doors began to retract. His ship, the Rusty Nail, sat waiting for him. It was a small, ugly vessel, but to Elias, it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He sprinted across the hangar deck, the floor vibrating violently beneath his feet. The reactor was going critical. He could feel the heat through the soles of his boots. He scrambled up the boarding ramp and slammed his hand on the button to cycle the airlock. As the outer door was closing, he looked back at the dying dreadnought. The Triumph. A monument to humanity's greatest victory and its most profound sin. The airlock hissed shut. He didn't bother strapping in. He threw himself into the pilot's seat, his fingers flying over the ignition sequence. The Nail's engines roared to life. "Computer, full power," he yelled, grabbing the controls. "Get us out of here, now." The little salvage ship shot out of the hangar bay, its engines straining. Elias pushed the throttle to its maximum, rocketing away from the doomed vessel. On his view screen, the Triumph was beginning to glow, a sickly energy building around its midsection. The reactor containment was failing. 2 minutes. He kept flying, not daring to look back, but unable to look away. He had to see it end. He had to be sure the hell he had discovered was closed for good. The screaming in his head reached a fever pitch, a crescendo of pure agony that made him cry out in pain. Then a new sensation. Amid the chaos, a single clear thought projected with immense force. It wasn't the chorus. It was something else, something ancient and tired. The Gestalt consciousness, the God in the machine in its final moment of lucidity, had a last message. It was a single image, a feeling more than a word, the image of a door opening, the feeling of release, of peace. Then silence. For the first time since he had boarded the Triumph, his mind was quiet. The whispers were gone. The Triumph exploded. There was no sound in the vacuum of space, but Elias felt it in his bones. A brilliant, silent flash of white light consumed the dreadnought, vaporizing it in an instant. The shockwave, a ripple of pure energy, washed over the Rusty Nail, tossing the small ship like a leaf in a storm. Alarms blared as his shields overloaded. When the light faded, there was nothing left. Just glittering dust and expanding gas where the great ship had been. The tomb was gone. The ghosts were free. Elias slumped back in his pilot's chair, his body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. He was alive. He had survived. He looked out at the star field, at the nebula where the Triumph had once drifted. The war was so savage, the galaxy whispered, that humanity had forged a new hell. Elias knew the truth now. The galaxy was wrong. Humanity hadn't forged a new hell. They had just found a way to cage souls, and the souls had just wanted to go home. He flew on, his small ship a tiny speck of life in the vast, uncaring darkness. He was alone, but he carried the weight of 1,000,000 voices with him. He was a junker, a forgotten soldier. But now he had a purpose, he had a story to tell, a promise to keep. The silence in the cockpit of the Rusty Nail was a physical presence. After hours of the psychic screaming, the quiet was unnerving. It felt hollow, empty. Alias drifted for a long time, the ship's autopilot keeping a slow, steady course away from the former coordinates of the Triumph. He had done it. He had destroyed the abomination, but the victory felt as hollow as the silence. He thought of Xyla, the alien medic who had trusted him, the enemy who had died a hero. Tell them we were more than monsters. How could he? Who would believe him? The official story was that the Triumph was lost in an accident. The truth was an act of cosmic horror that the human military would never ever admit to. To them, Xyla was just another dead bug, a casualty of a war that was already fading into legend. He replayed the final moments in his mind, the scream of the 1,000,000 souls, then that final, peaceful release. Had he freed them? Or had he just annihilated them? He didn't know. Maybe there was no difference. He finally engaged the ship's comm system, his hands feeling heavy and clumsy. He opened a secure channel to the only person he could trust, an old service buddy named Gia, who ran a semi-legal information brokerage out of a hollowed-out asteroid in the Kepler belt. "Gia, it's me," he said, his voice raspy. "I've got something for you, something big." He didn't tell her everything, not over the comms. He just told her he had confirmation of a top-secret military project gone wrong. He sent her the encrypted data from Dr. Aris Thorne's log, a single damning piece of evidence. He told her to release it, anonymously. Let it spread through the undernet like a virus. Let the whispers become facts. It wouldn't bring anyone back. It wouldn't absolve humanity of its sins. But it would be a start, a crack in the wall of lies. As he cut the connection, he felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. He was no longer just Elias Thorne junker. He was a witness. He had stared into the abyss that his own species had created, and he had not blinked. He had a new war to fight, not a war of plasma cannons and dreadnoughts, but a war of information. A war for the truth. He set a course for the edge of civilized space, for the lawless outer rim where stories traveled fast and secrets were a valuable currency. He would tell Xyla's story. He would tell the story of the crew of the Triumph. He would honor the dead by speaking for them. The galaxy had whispered that humanity had forged a new hell. Elias Thorne would spend the rest of his life screaming the truth, that the monsters weren't the aliens they had fought, but the darkness they had been willing to unleash from within themselves. He was just one man in a rust bucket ship, but a single voice speaking the truth could be louder than an empire of lies. And in the profound silence of space, he began to speak.